All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me on another Ask Me Anything live stream here on a Tuesday evening. And hopefully, I know I had a weird start on the show there, little delay between when the program actually got going. Just a quick reminder, it is an Ask Me Anything show, which means that you can ask me anything. No guarantees you're going to like the answers to the questions or that I can even answer your questions, but I'll do my best. And depending on what type of device you're looking at this with, either on a computer or a phone or whatever, the areas where you put the questions in might be there and might be off to the side. But just like the little bug right here kind of says, just remember to do at We the Governed. It's just a little bit easier for me to actually spot your question, because typically what ends up happening, there ends up being a whole bunch of questions that tend to stack up on these. And when that happens, then it's just a little bit harder for me to actually pick your questions out unless there's something that makes it stand out a little bit. Real quick, for those who are relatively, if you're logging into the show and it's not Tuesday night and you're watching it after the fact, you can also ask me questions down in the comment section. I usually try to go back and pay attention to the comments on most of my videos, including the live stream. So I'll try to get back to you if you have any questions that way, or at least respond to you. I do read pretty much most of the comments. Sometimes things get a little busy. I don't catch up on all of it, but I generally will be able to watch most of them. So, and I have been annoying the political class a little bit more this week. It's always good to do that. And just in case, for those of you who don't remember, obviously Bob Ferguson is not a big fan of mine. And I'm going to play this just as a real quick oldie but goodie, because it's always worth remembering that sometimes the governor does actually know who I am, and he's not too happy with me most of the time. This is a quick reminder about that.
A right-wing Republican, Glenn Morgan, known well to many of you, I suspect. We know Glenn Morgan was recently awarded the Volunteer of the Year by the state Republican Party. That's Glenn Morgan. And again, Glenn Morgan's politics are well known to any of you who follow local politics. Glenn Morgan. Glenn Morgan's the Glenn Morgan. Glenn Morgan is Glenn Morgan.
So there you hear it from the governor's mouth himself, and he is not my biggest fan for some reason. Never been able to figure out why. It might be those PC complaints I filed against him. It might be the corruption investigations. It might just be because there were multiple Bob Fergusons that ran against him for a week or so during his last election cycle, and there's 40 more out there who might run against him again. This is coming up time when he decides to try to run. Who knows? But regardless, sometimes these guys just don't like those of us who are actually paying attention to what they do. If you saw my recent video that I put out, I did focus on a couple of legislators. Senator Jamie Peterson was mainly focused in the video, but I also addressed Joe Fitzgibbon, and also former retired Senator Reuben Carlisle, and just some of their kickback schemes. I sort of touched on Lisa Brown's abuse of the Department of Commerce and how she sent a bunch of grants out to the Spokane area, far disproportionate to anything they'd ever received before. Conveniently, right before she decided to run for mayor out there, presumably using those grants as a way to kind of pave the way for her political campaign. And now she's causing great harm and destruction in that city. We really have a situation where, of course, government insiders and the political class that abuse us are using their situations and their positions to enrich themselves and their friends and cronies, anybody else who wants to get gravy off the gravy train and keep them in political office. And at the same time, they are doing it in a way, they change the laws and the rules continuously so that it protects them from any accountability or any legal liability or anything else like this. It's unethical, it's immoral, it's dishonest, and it's corrupt, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's go to prison illegal. And they are counting on that, and that's one of the ways their path to riches and wealth. Jamie Peterson's kind of the poster child. I went into my video, provide a lot of details on that. And I was also on the John Curley show earlier today. If you happen to be listening to the radio in the Seattle area, you might have heard me on that show. Just discussed this for a while with him. He's also done some research and come across some of the similar information. And I want to point out that the story that I did was really based off of publicly available information that anybody could get if they're looking, which means that let's pretend the Seattle Times was actually a newspaper and they were still committing acts of journalism there. if they were really doing that anymore, this would be a story that they could run, talking about the undue influence of political insiders and how according to the public disclosure documents, the amount of money that Senator Peterson gets from McKinstry, who happens to have tens of millions of dollars of sole source, no bid contracts with government entities, and that happens to pay him somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 a year for that. Plus, he has percentage ownerships in those businesses that also get more and more contracts based on the laws and regulations that he gets passed in the Senate, and his cooperation with Representative Joe Fitzgibbons on that side of things, on the House side, making sure that there's enough money to go around to everybody. And when you dig into it and you see how all these guys are interconnected and how the legislation that they push has nothing to do with clean energy or green anything other than the cash they plan on putting in their pocket, and instead, they're just very happy to inflict pain and suffering on the rest of us and increasing our cost of living at the expense, living expenses for us. And they're very happy to take that money for themselves, even if it's a small fraction of the overall amount of money they're extracting from the economy. And this is just who they are. This is how they operate. And it's still worth it to go into some of the details. And I thought that was a good video and a helpful video today. Also, since the last time I did a live stream, I had promised that I would do an interview with Representative Jim Walsh, which I did, and I broke that into, it's actually a 6-part series, but I broke in the first 5 videos you might have seen that came out, and so those videos are out now, and let me know what your thoughts are on that as well. And if you have any additional questions. Also, as I had promised 2 years ago when I started doing these live streams, here's the next 5 places that I will be in Washington State if you want to come meet me in person. Actually, one of them's not in Washington, just over the border in Idaho. On April 18th, I'll be doing election integrity. I'm actually emceeing this event with Dr. Frank and Seth Keshel and others. If you are familiar with election integrity efforts that are going on right now, you know Jonathan Cho was recently just arrested down in, I believe it was Nevada, and James O'Keefe down in California is being charged, and all these different attacks on anybody who's daring to look into election integrity, similar to the threats that we have faced a number of years ago in Washington State when we were digging into this then, and that the implied threats that we still have hanging over our heads, especially with a corrupt attorney general like Nick Brown and Bob Ferguson as our governor, and the fact that the last thing that anybody wants to have is apparently access to those voter rolls and find out what the heck's going on there. So if you're interested in that, April 18th, that's a Thursday, I'll be out there emceeing, or actually, sorry, that's a Saturday, I'll be out there emceeing that event. The next Thursday, which is April 23rd, I'll be at the Clark County Republican Women's event. It's in Battleground. I'm assuming that's in the evening around 6 o'clock. I didn't write down the times here, so you might have to look that up. Clark County Republican Women's Event, April 23rd in Battleground. On April 25th, I still have a Citizens Alliance for Property Rights event out in Spokane. It is possible my date is wrong on that. That's a Saturday. That's the date I put down originally, and I have it on my calendar, but I have to double-check that one. Wednesday, April 29th, I'll be out at the North Beach Republican Women's Club, which is out in Ocean Shores. Looks like I'm doing a speaking engagement out there. I think that's a lunchtime one. It's what it kind of looks like right now in my calendar. And then Thursday, April 30th, I will be at the Save Our Sheriff's event at Kelly Farms over in Pierce County. So a number of different events coming up. Those are opportunities to see me if any of those are near you. And if they aren't, that's okay. I travel around the state all the time. I'll probably be near you anyway. We do have a couple of Doge Washington training classes coming up, but they aren't within the next 5 events, I should say, for the rest of April coming up. So that's it. Let me jump into some of these questions because I see them starting to stack up. And let's get to that as quick as I can. Always good questions here. Okay. First question. Kathleen 253 at We the Governed. What made you choose to attend Columbia University? Well, that's a funny one. Totally by accident. I accidentally got into Columbia University, and that's actually the truth of it. And sometimes people's lives change in weird and funny ways. I was a fast runner back in the day, and I was trying to go to state my junior year in track. And back then we ran at Highline High School. I was in the South Puget Sound League district, or the South Puget Sound League, and our district races were up at Highline High School. And that was in the West Central District that they had back then. This is AAA in that era, late 80s era, was actually the big schools, not like 4A like they have now. And in order to qualify for state, it was the most populous for our district, it was the most populous district race. So the top 6 people in the mile and the 2 mile could go to state. And I thought I had a pretty good chance in the mile. And instead, I got 7th place in the mile. So I missed it. And then I ran the 2 mile shortly after that, hoping to, Hail Mary pass, try to get to the state in the 2 mile. And I got 6th place again, or 7th place. And so I was very disappointed. I missed it. And oddly enough, for the first time, the only time I've ever seen this actually happen in a track meet in high school, a guy got disqualified from Kent Ridge, if I remember right. And because of that, I went to state my junior year. Which was my first season of running track, because I'd been at a Christian school before then. So I'd gone to state in cross country the next year, but I went to track state and ran a decent time in the 2 mile and completely got destroyed, but I still ran a decent time. And apparently, this is before the internet, so this is before it was as commonly available. There were some alumni from Washington State at Columbia University who had been on the cross country track teams, and they brought the state results from Washington State, and they gave it to the coach, and they said, why don't you call some of these people, see if they have good enough grades that they could get into the college. And so I took I was actually planning to go in the military, and truthfully, I wasn't even going to go to college at the time. I was a good student, and I'd done well on my SATs, but I just wasn't thinking about going to college. And this guy calls me up from Columbia, and I thought it was Columbia Basin Eastern Community College. So I was blowing the guy off on the phone because I wasn't going to run for Columbia Basin, and I'm not trying to insult anybody. I just wasn't going to run for a community college at the time. And when he said something about, we'll fly out to New York, you can come see the school and see if you want to go, I hung up on him, and I remember thinking, what the heck is this guy talking about? I'd never heard of Columbia before. So I had a U.S. News World Report, and I actually looked up the college, Columbia University, in the U.S. News and World Report college listings that I had in my room at the time. And I saw that Columbia was the 9th-ranked college in America. And I thought, I can't believe this. These guys actually would want me to go there. So it kind of made me change things, and I actually applied. And of all things, it was either go to Columbia or go into the military. And so I only applied to one college, and I managed to get in. I had good enough grades to get into Columbia, good enough SATs and stuff. But I think it also, they had never had any. I went to Thomas Jefferson High School, where I was graduating in Federal Way. I just think they'd never seen a kid from that school ever apply before. It seemed like a weird place to them. They have geographic dispersion kind of rules where they're trying to pull kids from all over the country. And it didn't hurt that I was a fast runner. And so I went back to college, and that's what got me into Columbia. And I was totally unprepared for the university, for New York City, really. I had never seen crime like that before in my life. Running in Central Park and Van Cortlandt Park, and out on the sidewalks when we would run down the South Street Seaport and go in the World Trade Center and stuff. When I did a lot of those runs, it was very, very different than I had ever experienced at home. But that's what got me into Columbia. I didn't really become an activist there until my sophomore year, when I was more comfortable, and that's when I took over the college Republicans, because I was particularly annoyed with the socialists on campus, and that's how I discovered my love for activism and my interest in politics at the time. Even though I kind of left it for a number of years, when I graduated, it was not hard for me to step back into that role, because it's kind of always been who I was. Thank you for that question. That's kind of an odd one there, personal one. B. York, 1983. What is the likelihood that Republicans can actually take people being mad about the income tax and turn it into an actual gain in the legislature? Great question. And this is a good question. It really has more to do with what is causing what causes Republicans to lose in some of these races. It is lazy at some point to, and believe me, nobody's done more to work on election integrity in Washington State than me. I mean, there might be some more people out there, but there's a handful of us that have spent a lot of time working on this, and I was doing it long before it was cool and people cared about it. issues and concerns that we have there still exist. The concerns I have with mail-in voting still exist. I have only done 24 videos on this subject, so it's not like I haven't been talking about it or trying to deal with this issue. Before then, and I worked at the Freedom Foundation, we had a voter integrity project back then. Kind of a holdover from the Rossi Gregoire era and some of the work that had been done back in the day. So I'm familiar with these issues. The biggest problem, though, that really hurts us is a pathetic sort of apathy, and it's combined apathy and ignorance. When I was a college Republican, I remember I said apathy and ignorance are the primary vehicles through which tyranny and destruction of our freedoms, that's the freeway on which they travel. They presume that if you're going to be apathetic and ignorant, that allows them, that opens the door to socialist ideas that are horrible and terrible. It opens the door to allowing them to take over this long march through the institutions, which the leftists have talked about for almost, I want to say it's about 80 years in America now. And they've been successful in a lot of ways just simply because of this apathy and ignorance. And the way it manifests itself today is mostly in situations like voting, where people will say, I'm not going to vote. There are, and my vote doesn't count or something like that. And because they didn't vote, that's what put an extra couple legislators who are crazy leftist Democrats in Olympia. Because of that, that's why we have a lot of dumb, stupid, terrible, bad bills that just came out of the legislature, and I don't think they would have been there if we had a smaller number of Democrats down there, where there would have been more Republicans in opposition. And some of these elections are decisions that are made by just less than 100 votes or a couple hundred votes. The 10th legislative district, most significantly, with Clyde Shavers, who's a terrible, pathological, stolen valor kind of guy, who's in there right now because of literally just a few hundred Republicans who just decided that their vote didn't count, so they didn't bother to cast it. And that's just lazy, sloppy work. I was talking to some of the Let's Go Washington people recently, and they said for the people who signed, who were registered voters, who signed all 4 of the ballots or of their initiatives recently, half of them didn't vote. Now, that's ridiculous. It is ridiculous, and it is worth noting that if you are if the 5 minutes it takes to fill out your ballot is so much work for you and so difficult for you to do, even after you've taken the effort and time to sign your name and sign an initiative, which is actually harder in many ways than voting, and you still don't bother to vote, especially in Washington State, it's ridiculous, and that costs us a lot of elections. Recently, some elections down in Florida, some Republicans truly lost because of pathetic turnout of Republicans. And there's no excuse. That laziness, that apathy, that presumption that somebody else is coming to save you or you're not responsible for helping anything, that's what actually costs us anything. So there are a lot of people quite upset by the craziness of Democrats in Washington State. Some people will run away. That's okay. They won't run far or last long because that's how it goes. You're just going to go to another state where if you don't win here, then we continue to export the crazies to whatever state you think you're running to, Idaho, Wyoming, Texas, Florida, it doesn't really matter. And they don't, socialists can't exist without basically taking everybody down around them. And so they're going to be, they're already active in those places. And now you're moving there, assuming, again, somebody else is going to save you. They won't save you, but you can save yourself if you engage and get involved. It seems likely the Republicans should be able to pick up a few seats in the Senate or House, both houses, really. They don't need to pick up a huge amount. They just need to pick up some. More significantly, actually, are the 5 Supreme Court justices that will be on the ballot this cycle. Remember, Dave Larson was very, very close to winning the last Supreme Court justice race, and there are some good indications that we might be able to do much better with getting some justices who may actually know what the Constitution says. They won't be beholden to Bob Ferguson and the Democrats. We might actually, for the first time in a generation, get some judges in there. We have the opportunity to get some judges in there when time after time we've not had even an opportunity to vote anybody because there was no other options. So I think there's a significant chance. It doesn't mean that they would take over the legislature, although you never really know. Again, You can't do it if you don't try, but trying is the first step, and getting good candidates, not people that are clueless as heck, not people that have no serious plan, not people that are lazy, not people that don't know what they're doing at all, but getting candidates who are serious about campaigning and then getting out that voting, not being apathetic. It's such a minor amount of work to do. Voting is the least significant. It's like breathing. It's just like the bare minimum of being involved civically. And if we did that, then we would be in a much different situation than we are right now. Let's see. Same name by B. York, 1983. Just watch your video on kickback schemes. Why is no one doing an initiative to rein that in? Well, that's a good question, and that is a good idea for an initiative. I actually think there are some opportunities there. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that ethics laws, most of the ethics laws that exist in Washington State were there were basically two waves of ethics laws that occurred in our state. One was in the 1920s and 30s. It really came in as part of the reform problems that they were discovering back then, mostly with politicians stealing the money and just stealing it, or stealing land. They'd use the money to buy land and they'd steal that, or they'd steal stuff, And so people were upset about that. They were also upset about the waste. And so there was a whole bit of reform that occurred in that era. They call that kind of the progressive era, but there was actually practical government reform and some level of transparency they first introduced then. That was inadequate and moved forward a number of decades. And by the late 60s, early 70s, that's when the next big movement for reform came in place, having more to do with sunshine laws, Open Public Meetings Act, Public Records Act, and campaign finance laws. They all kind of got introduced in that same era. And then gradually what's happened is that they've started to water those down. There was kind of an upsurge of this through the 80s. And then once the Democrats got in control, or at least had more control in the state, then, of course, they worked on eroding those, including the ethics laws and everything else like that. So what you're really seeing is an erosion of those laws, both in spirit and the letter of the law, that gets watered down, and the boards that are set up to so-called supervise them, they're corrupted because they're appointed by governor, the same governor who doesn't want to investigate his friends. You have manipulation that occurs, and it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts. They pass one law for kind of a reasonable reform. Okay, I could understand the scenario. Then they pass another law, and they pass another law, and each of these laws erodes away the freedoms and the transparency and the ethics rules he might have had before, and that's what allows Jamie Peterson to become a multimillionaire based on his job in the Senate and the kickback schemes that go to his company and business that pay him fat stacks of cash, $500,000 plus a year, so that he can go in and keep passing more laws and rules that simply create the no bid, single source contracts that go to his company. And so it would be, you can close the door on individual sort of things like this, but each time you close that door, you have to realize there's like 100 doors that are open right now. So closing them all is a little bit more complex than just an initiative, especially with single subject rules. But we could try that, and I think it'd be a popular one in my opinion. Let's see. IDRI Wizard with the governor. Hey, Glenn, how is Peterson's profiting personally from his legislation not a conflict of interest, and what can be done about it? Okay, so here's a couple things. Number one, he had actually proposed a bill a number of years ago that actually raised the threshold of percentage ownership in a company below which it would not be a conflict of interest if that company benefited from some piece of legislation that you put out. And so I think that it says now that you have to have a 10% stake or more in a company that directly benefits from a piece of legislation you're proposing in order for it to be a conflict of interest, which means you'd have to recuse yourself and you couldn't be involved in that bill in the legislature. In theory, that's what it means. Well, he has a 2% and 1% stake in the two different companies that he profits from currently and that profit from the contracts that he's kicking out all the time. I still think it's in spirit a definite violation with all the government entities, but mostly they're about disclosure, and these are the ones that we can find through. They aren't disclosed because the other option you have is you can go in as a legislator, and he did this in 2014, where he went in and he challenged McKinstry, and he said, listen, they should not have to disclose who all their clients are above $12,000, which is a requirement that you see in the PDC rules, and it also applies in the ethics laws. And so by keeping that concealed, whatever his argument was that he used back then, and I wasn't there when he made that argument, but that's what actually makes it more difficult for us to see exactly how many conflicts he has in this in his day job, right, where he's working at McKinstry. So technically, I don't think it's totally illegal. Is it morally wrong? Absolutely. Is it corrupt? Sure. Is it a kickback scheme? Yes. Everybody who's marginally literate with an education, IQ maybe over 65, and say you went past 5th grade, and maybe kindergarten in homeschool or private school, maybe 5th grade in public school, you would definitely know. Maybe you wouldn't understand it if you went to Evergreen State College, but everyone else is going to know there's something wrong with this type of an operation. And so the question is, what's the legal mechanism by which you can enforce it? And if you've gamed the system in certain ways, and keep in mind, this doesn't mean that he's not violating the law in some other illegal way. He probably is, but I don't have those documents in front of me yet, or at least I'm not willing to go public with them yet. So then, I just want to point that out. So it has more to do with what you could enforce and what you could actually do. So let's get into some of these other questions. And somebody said that you liked the video. Thank you very much. I'm glad you did. Let's see. Stop fighting them. Start. I don't know what that one is. There's some comments. Let's get to the questions. Crunk Miners. Somebody just retracted a question. Crunk Myers. Then maybe we can get regular bills passed. I'm assuming you're saying if we get some legislators in there, yes, you could, but you just retracted that. I don't know why. Michael Case, 8231. After your video from earlier today, I have to wonder who can see or who can sue these people for embezzlement if the state's AG won't. Well, keep in mind, embezzlement's different than just kickback fraud or kickback schemes or insider dealing, which is essentially what some of this is. And keep in mind, if they were dumb enough to put down a statement where it was a quid pro quo explicitly, where they said, okay, University of Washington, listen, here's the deal. And they put it in writing, and they said, if you don't give your $10 million contract to my company, then I'm going to make sure your budget gets cut by 5% next year. If he didn't actually put that in writing, then there's no enforcement mechanism to document that it happened. So even if that's the implied thing that happened there, who knows? You can't enforce it. So, and where would you go to enforce that? I'm really trying to point out to people, believe me, this guy's not alone. I mean, he's not alone at all. There's plenty of other people, and we'll get to some of them. I talked about, I think, 3 of them in that bill or in that video, but there's plenty of others who have similar little schemes going on all the time, and some of them are probably sloppier, some of them are less lucrative, some of them are just beginning, they're just figuring out how to create the scheme, and that's where we're at. So sorry, I don't know how on that specific example how you'd be able to file a lawsuit. Listen, I'm happy to sue these guys if I can find a practical path. I've been in court so many times; it's really no difference to me at this point in time. But I'm also trying not to waste my lawsuits. The most I've ever had going at one time was like 30. And it's really difficult. It becomes challenging to track all your lawsuits that you have going on, back and forth, motion practice. You really end up spending a lot more time in court, and you have to see these very corrupt judges when you're doing that. Most of the cases that I end up having to deal with go into Thurston County Superior Court, which is the court where the Constitution goes to die. And so, anyway, it's always important just to keep documenting this stuff and keep putting it out there. And then you never know what you're going to trigger with other people who may know or have access to some of the evidence that you're looking for that would kick it up to another notch, right? Let's see. P61X BP12. Do you think the millionaire's tax will be challenged in court, and then they'll decide that the tax needs to be universally applied rather than only to millionaires? That's a great question, and actually, I want to address that issue because it is kind of interesting. Essentially, what the Supreme Court, what the state constitution says, and the previous Supreme Court decisions from back in the 30s says is that, listen, if you're going to impose an income tax, it has to be imposed the way a sales tax or a property tax is imposed, where it's uniform and it's applied to everybody equally. So everybody has to be treated the same. The argument the Democrats have with the current ones, they're saying, yeah, this is an income tax that technically actually does apply to everybody, except that we give $1 million exemption, and that's how we get around it. That's going to be their argument. And and yet, so that'll be one of their arguments. And so they could make it constitutional if they eliminated the exemption or the exemption threshold. So if they dropped it down to zero and they said every dollar, or just a substantially lower amount, so that pretty much everybody's hit by it, they get out of the constitutional argument. Politically, that's probably not the place these guys want to be in most of the time, even in Washington State. So, but yes, you're describing an outlier scenario that has been discussed by a variety of attorneys already on that issue. And good on you for catching that one. AZ Narek, what is the chances? What is the chances? I mean, what are the chances, I suppose, this gets overturned by Supreme Court or the initiative once we get the 300,000 signatures? Please, sir. Well, and I'm going to point out it's actually 340,000 signatures, and that means you have to collect about 400,000 signatures. If it goes on the ballot, that means, assuming you got two different ways you could run. You could do an initiative to the people, which would go on the ballot this November, which I think that's probably what would happen. But you could also do an initiative to the legislature, which means it goes on the ballot next year. And if the initiative would pass, I think that would kill it pretty much there. Could the Supreme Court then go and now you also have the potential scenario where it could get defeated. It could get defeated in court. Particularly, this is actually true because this case wouldn't most likely be decided until next year. 5 of these, our Supreme Court's made up of 9 judges. So 9, 5 of them are up for election, including the Chief Justice. 2 of them are vacant seats, so they'll be open. It's anybody can win it. 2 of them are going to be appointments by Ferguson that have not been in there very long, and so a challenge is reasonable. And so you have this scenario where money into a Supreme Court race, these 5 Supreme Court races, is actually money well spent on the political process. And if you got some judges in there that change the makeup of the Supreme Court, and maybe perhaps they believe English is the language of the country, they've read the Constitution before, which would make them very different than some of the justices we have there now, and they're not beholden to Governor Ferguson, that gives you kind of an opportunity to make a pretty big difference on the Supreme Court. Even if you can't win all of them, just getting a couple of sane people in there would be a huge change and a big difference. But the chances are there's a lot of moving parts between now and then. Let's see. Crunk Mines, after the wealthy leave the state en masse, how long realistically do you think Bob will start to come for the middle class life? He will do it instantly. I doubt they'll wait that long. And remember, most of the wealthy in Washington State, and this is a statistical truth and a fact, are actually not Republicans. So most of the wealthy in Washington State are liberals and leftists. Yes, the absurdity of them voting for the people that made them leave the state is probably something that very few of them contemplate. But if you've been around leftists, you're going to realize that they don't have to make sense or even understand what they're doing. This is what they do. They're like locusts. They travel to a new community. They're all moving to Boise. They'll trash Idaho next. Then they'll move to South Dakota, trash South Dakota, Wyoming, wherever, right? They can't help themselves. This is what they do. The Californians left California, and they're trashing Arizona and Nevada and New Mexico and also Texas as they move into Texas. Come on. I mean, this is what they do. But the question is, their intention has always been to push this down to lower income people because that's where the money's at. It's not as they get a bunch of money from rich people, sure, but the rich people change domicile. They're able to leave pretty easily. Think of all those Microsoft lefties that up there on the east side. Taking their money is they're happy to vote for people in a virtue signaling sort of situation. Once they get in, they don't like it so much, then they leave. No different than the Democrats in New York used to be when they'd vote Democrats in and you'd have horrible, terrible crime, or the Democrats in Detroit or Philadelphia or Baltimore. This is what they do. They just put terrible people in there and then they decide, oh, time to leave. So how could that have happened? That's the kind of stuff. But we'll see what happens. Annoyed by socialists. I think that's a question. This is from IDRI. Wizard, annoyed by socialists. Yeah, I was annoyed by socialists when I was at Columbia. I'm assuming that's what you see there. Crunk means. Anyway, do you have an opinion on Joe Kent? Well, listen, I like Joe Kent. I used to do events with him several times. I don't tend to get caught up in Republican primaries too much, but when he was running for Congress, as in my district, I went to his couple of his kickoff events over the years. We spoke the same kind of events. There was an auction item that we had, I think, out of the Lewis County Republicans that was like a dinner where it was come have dinner with Joe Kent and Glenn Morgan, and we both did that together. I've talked to him. I had a pretty strong positive opinion of him. The way that he left, and actually this position at the Trump administration seemed like a really good fit for his background, especially if you know how the military background that he did have, and it seemed to fit perfectly. And I just was very surprised at the public level of drama on the way out the door. This is not how I would generally leave a political job like this, I don't think. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but so I don't know. I don't know what he's going through, what he's doing right now. So IDRI Wizard here, your thoughts on the legislation signed by the dear governor blocking voter info from federal scrutiny. Yeah, that's pretty typical. Listen, there is one thing the Democrats care about more than anything else, even more than taxes. And that is making sure the voter rolls here are as untransparent, opaque, and difficult to figure out as they possibly can. There'll never be a real audit of the voter rolls in Washington State if the Democrats can retain their ideal and preferred approach to elections. Now, there are some things out of their control. They're going to run out of room, I think, with the Supreme Court coming in and most likely ruling against the ability to count ballots after the election. That's going to have an impact on our state. It doesn't eliminate mail-in voting, but it does change the whole process. In fact, it goes back to like an Oregon style where they have to receive them all and count them on Election Day. That will change the calculus for a lot of ballot harvesting and reliance on the post office, which has become an unreliable partner in the election world. And there are things that will eventually potentially come out, especially the DOJ lawsuit. I don't think they can uphold this and prevent the feds from looking into this, but we'll have to see. What they're really trying to do there is they're trying to make it illegal for people like me to get access and help provide information about the fraud or some other dishonest element of elections. No Democrat, not one of them that's elected office in Washington State, is ever going to actually tell you the truth about what's going on with the elections. They absolutely won't. They're afraid to do it because of the insider deals. You'll see them sometimes accuse each other of cheating. They aren't doing that because they think the election process is awesome. Just as a point to make there. Let's see. Skeptical Mom, 2948. And by the way, the reason why We the Governed didn't show up bright orange there is because there were spaces in between. Do you think the SAVE Act will actually have an impact on Washington state elections, preventing the Democrats from cheating? By the way, nothing prevents you from cheating. Cheating will happen. Cheating has happened long before any of us have been born. In fact, the first cheating that occurred in elections happened with the first time somebody came up with the concept of elections. Cheating has always happened. The question is, what can you do to reduce the cheating, reduce the likelihood of success of cheating? How can you make things as transparent as possible to make cheating a risky venture? There's a lot of things you can do to reduce it. You cannot eliminate it. And the SAVE Act would help things quite a bit. It would not eliminate cheating. Nothing eliminates cheating. There is no utopian solution to elections, but you can definitely fix a lot of the problems that are obviously out there with the all mail-in voting system that we have in our state today. AZ Nurek, former AG Rob McKenna, said on Curley's radio show, he is positive, saying the Washington Supreme Court will not ruin or I think you mean rule, in favor of this income state tax like they did for the capital gains one. Well, I mean, Bob, I should say, Rob McKenna can be as positive as he wants on it, but I sometimes think he might be wearing rose-colored glasses when it looks at the Supreme Court. Listen, he is the former Attorney General. He is a much more capable attorney than I would be, and by experience and background. But I'm going to tell you, his trust in the legal system certainly exceeds mine. So I'm a little bit more skeptical. That being said, I don't believe just because something's difficult or challenging doesn't mean you pre-surrender and give up. I know there's a lot of people who enjoy losing. They like giving up. Pre-surrender is their default position. Doom-mongering is the only thing they know how to do. I understand this. I get it. There's a lot of people that feel that way. And they feel that way for different reasons. And it's worth understanding the psychology of why people feel that way a little bit, because it's a motivating. It makes them feel superior to other people by saying that. But at the end of the day, all the people that have been doom mongering for the last, say, 7 generations around us, most of them were wrong. It wasn't that they were wrong about the problems that they were observing. It's that they were wrong that people can't adapt or find solutions to those problems in the future. What you can't do is just presume somebody else, and you shouldn't do this, ever presume that somebody else is coming to save you, or that trust the plan, or imagine that somebody else is going to do it and you can sit back eating bonbons and watching Netflix and somehow the world will be solved despite your laziness. The more people that are lazy and not involved, then the more you hand it over to the bad people who will be more motivated. When I say the future belongs to those who show up, it's continually show up. It's not just once, and you have to grind away at it. And the people who do it more often and more consistently, they're the ones that win. That's how it works. That's how politics has almost always worked. Michael Case, 8231. What's the deal with the 400,000 votes that were counted as being double votes? And if those votes had to be tossed, what does that really mean for the people of Washington? So, Michael, this is. I'm glad you asked this, because this was something that came out publicly. Where somebody said, I'm actually trying to run down this number, and I don't see the source documents behind that claim. I really don't. You don't have to convince me that we have double voting problems and double voter registration problems in the state. I have found that before. It's an issue that we've addressed. We've had discussions and confrontations with both auditors and the Secretary of State over the years, going back through multiple administrations on this issue quite a bit. But I've also spent a lot of time looking through the voter rolls, and I need to be shown the evidence that somebody has that that's actually the number that they have. I don't know if what that means is this is why, because I can't look at the baseline data that they claim that they're using that from. Do they mean that there were 200,000 people and then they were registered twice, so therefore there's 400,000 total votes? Do they mean that there were 400,000 bad votes that duplicated another 400,000 legitimate votes? I don't know what they mean with that. And so that is a piece of information that I have seen floating around out there, and I have not been able to get to the source documents, and whoever's putting it out there should have those source documents. I need to be able to understand where they're getting that so I can replicate the data set and verify that that information is correct and exactly which year they're really talking about. And we have access to the same data set, so unless somebody got something or found a tool that they could use that's different than what we've used already, I'm really, really curious about it. So I just don't know. And it seems like a big number to me, but I'm interested in looking at the data, and I just don't have the original source data on that. IDRI Wizard, could the people present an initiative to amend the income tax bill to exempt anyone not working for the government? That's funny, but that would definitely violate the state constitution by itself, even though I love where your thought process on that would be. But that would probably be thrown out as unconstitutional very clearly. It's like a bill of attainder or something. You're really picking on somebody very specifically, as much as I appreciate the thought. TZ Burton, do you know anything about a lawsuit by Washington State AG versus loot boxes? It's an end run, or it's an end around on gambling. You win a prize that is redeemable for cash. No, TZ, actually, to be honest, I don't know anything about that. So tell me more, because I just don't know anything about that at all. Thanks for asking. It sounds like distantly familiar, but I don't know anything about that one. HOX9RN at We the Governed. And why did that? Oh, you spelled it wrong, so that's why it didn't pop up. Did Nick Hanauer move to Montana? Well, rumor has it that he has moved. He is claiming that he hasn't, but he may have changed his domicile to another state so he can avoid the taxes, capital gains most significantly, and probably income tax now as well. And but I don't know that it was Montana, so we have to dig some more research into that. Now I am interested in that one. Yeah, something boss. I'm not going to say that on the air. Considering that the tech worker demographic in the dead has kept Washington a blue state, any chance income tax drives out the very tech workers working for more taxes and self-correction? Actually, yeah, they are the ones most likely to be displaced. You got a couple things going on at once there. You're having their companies that employ them are moving, and so they're most likely taking the workers with them pretty quickly. Secondly, AI is being very disruptive in that space as well, which is reducing the amount of jobs that they potentially have, and a lot of them are getting ready to jump ship for different reasons. That I actually think you're going to find that a lot of these people, they're not Republicans that are moving. Even though those of us who are conservative and stuff, we know people that are going to pay attention to politics and say these guys are crazy and move. That's actually not a majority of the population. It tends to be a pretty small amount. They may be our friends, they may be good people that we know, but that's not a big population percentage-wise who are that focused on politics that they move. Now, money, better jobs, sometimes better schools, some of that stuff could drive people to move. For the last 1,000 years of human history, moving for better jobs or better life is a pretty common thing to do, and moving today is much easier than it used to be. Michael Case, 8231, in California, the state IRS is being used to charge people, is what I think you mean, charge people for leaving the state through taxation. Could this be the real purpose for the income tax here? Well, listen, the type of people that we have in government today, the Democrats in Washington State, I mean, they would love whatever level of abuse they could throw around that they thought they could get away with, and using an income tax as part of that tool, I'm sure has been there, and they're probably very excited about that. Here's a question. Fox9er02V, are you aware that in Washington, if you enroll in any state giveaway programs, they coerce you to register to vote over the phone? Yes, I am. SNAP, food stamps, Molina Community Health, everything. Yes, absolutely. Apple Health, anything you do, any government entity you visit, they are obligated to ask you to vote, or register to vote, I should say, whether you're already registered or not, whether you... they're just going to register you to vote multiple times. They'll register you to vote if you tell them no. That's just what they do. It's one of the problems with the way the voter registration system is set up here. And the incentive structure where they'll fire the employees at these government agencies if they don't register to vote. That's really part of the issue that we're also dealing with there as well. Crunk means another Joe Kent question. Why do you think he lost to Perez twice? The first time that Joe lost to Perez, again, this is my district, and was really more about a Republican divide than anything else. Republicans had pretty nasty infighting effort going on, and that infighting effort basically really did cost him, partially because he took out a Republican. You have to remember that in the primary, he bounced out Jamie Herrera Butler, who had been the Republican congresswoman from that district for quite a while, going back to 2010. So she'd been there quite a while. I just remember because I was running for assessor the same year that she was running for office. So she'd been there quite a while before Joe Kent bounced her out. Then that upset a lot of her supporters, and so those Republicans decided that they would rather have a Democrat than the Republican that bounced out the other Republican. So they basically undermined his campaign that cycle. The second cycle was a little different. I actually think the second cycle he got really hurt a lot by the consultant, but mainly it was just because the consultant really lied. Not that that's unusual. Most of them do. It's unfortunate. But I remember them talking about this doorbelling campaign that they had funded, and they did raise some money for it, but they never did anything. They never did what they said they were doing. And I remember pushing the consultant on it, asking, where, who do you have running your doorbelling campaign with all these people? And, the plan sounded pretty reasonable. And that he couldn't name anybody. And I was surprised because, and I know, it's not that I know everybody, but I would know enough people in that district that if you had some serious people running your doorbelling effort, I would know some of them. Not all of them, maybe, but I at least know some of them. And he had nothing to tell me. I should have realized that meant that he was lying and he had nothing to do. He wasn't doing it at all. And so it was a pretty, I think Joe, to some extent, in that race, and this would have happened to whatever Republican was using that consultant, they would have been screwed because the consultant was taking the money, apparently, and then just wasn't running the campaign that they said they were going to run. Thunder Designer 303, hello again. Glenn, here's my first question. Do you think Republicans will have issues in future elections if they don't listen to their base and focus more on domestic issues? Well, I've been focused on Washington State issues, and if you run in Washington State and you're not focused on Washington State issues, you are missing the boat on what's going to affect people who live here. I think that is what people are concerned about and care about. Whenever we have these foreign issues, with it doesn't matter what's Venezuela or Iran or back years ago in Iraq or wherever. Remember, and I'll never forget this, when I was in college, Bush Sr. was in office and the first Persian Gulf War happened. And he had the highest positive rating of any president in modern American history after winning the Gulf War and bringing all those soldiers home as kind of the peace dividend in the early 90s, 1990, 1991. And he was very popular, and he still lost that race because of local issues, which was really the Democrats talk. There was a minor, if you had been around that era, there was an economic downturn in 1992. And he took the brunt of that, said no new taxes, like a lot of squishy Republicans will say, and then they'll still pass a tax. That was his mistake, and it cost him. It wasn't the only thing it cost him. Ross Perot also cost him. But it was a good reminder that no matter how popular and how important something you might do overseas is, and no matter how popular it is at the time, it will not overshadow the domestic issues that are going on around the country, which is something that if I was a Republican running for office, I would be focused on. There's a lot of issues that have to be addressed. Fox 9er02V, and they sign up for voting before a state application is approved. Therefore, you could not have an ID to sign up for food stamps. Then if you get denied for food stamps, you're already registered to vote. I'm sorry. Yes, that's correct. And that is exactly how it works. I've talked to many employees, DSHS, mostly DSHS, Department of Licensing as well, DOL, which is where the majority of them still get their voter registration. And that's exactly what they do. Let's see. F-Track 8995. Did you hear about the giant Centralia Bacota BESS facility? Yes, I did. I believe there's two of them, actually. There's one there and there's one in Rochester, not too far away from where I live. I believe if it's allowed to be built in that location because of its size, Tenino would be in the path of the toxic plume. I don't know that Tenino would be, because the prevailing winds would actually be towards Centralia most likely. So I don't think Tenino would be in that toxic plume path, but it's certainly a lot closer to me than I would want it to be. So, and there's another one in Rochester. These BESS facilities are not good ideas. They're basically toxic fires. Basically set up these battery. It's this high density battery operation. Same thing they had up in Snoqualmie Valley. And it's being pushed because of the Green New Scam deal and the Climate Commitment Act push that they've done. And they're trying to put out these impossible and guaranteed to fail effort of making everything 100% electric everywhere. So no natural gas facilities, no nuclear facilities, apparently. Instead, they just want to go with these battery. So they're picking the most toxic operation you could ever create, that mankind has so far created anyway, outside of ancient nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and they've decided that this is what they're going to put everywhere, and these facilities are problematic. And it would not be good if they ever catch on fire. Let's see. Kinematic J, you showed Peterson's direct benefit from the clean building performance standard legislation. Do you plan to follow up to show the direct benefits McKinstry gets from the CCA? Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to keep going back and beating this dead. It's not really a dead horse. The thing is, that was it was a longer video than I like to produce, and that's absolutely true. I'm not using a teleprompter. So if I was using a teleprompter, I don't have one set up. So if I was using one, I could have a little bit tighter script to hit things a little bit tighter when I'm talking about these issues, but it's the best I could do without a teleprompter. And what I can tell you is that there are segments of this that could be explored in much more detail than what I have explained there. I tried to give an overview, and I was also trying to be clear that it wasn't just Jamie Peterson. It was Joe Fitzgibbons. It was Reuben Carlisle, former retired Senator Reuben Carlisle, which I don't really think you can talk about the CCA without talking about him. Mentioning the Department of Commerce, which is essentially the distribution vehicle for the CCA, as well as the Community Reinvestment Act before that, and other little scams that get kind of filtered through that operation. And so I think that we could go back and revisit some of these in more detail, and I'm likely to do that if people have that interest. Let's see. Crunk means I saw Today News for Reasonable People showed an article where there's a 63% spike in high-priced house listings recently. I saw something about that too, and again, you have to look at what it's based off of. If you're just doing these stories just to make it sound like there's something major going on, I'd have to look at it and put it in context to where it's at. It wouldn't surprise me, but and that could be happening. Kinematic Joy or Kinematic J, Kent also lost the first time around because they were encouraging same-day voting. He flipped on that strategy immediately after, to his credit. The one of the challenges, and it wasn't there was part of it. I remember that Kent was talking about waiting until the last minute to put your ballots in to avoid people trying to put in other schemes where they would overwhelm your ballots or figure out how far ahead you were so that they could make sure secret ballots were discovered later or something like that. The challenge with that is true implementation. And so what happened is a lot of people had lines a day of, they forgot about Election Day. You'd be surprised how many people don't know when Election Day is or that it's even happening. It's a sizable part of the population sometimes. And so you basically, just the attrition from screw-ups could be enough to make a pretty big difference. Let's see. Graphics Guru 2879. Glenn is I'm assuming you mean Islam War. It's misspelled, but Islam War. I'm assuming that close to ending real soon this year. I don't know if are you talking about the Iranian bombing? I suspect the military action over in Iran is going to be, close to done. But just newsflash here: there's been wars over there for the past probably 6,000 years, give or take, maybe a little more, as far back as recorded human history goes. So if you think it's going to end tomorrow, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the historical record probably wouldn't support that theory. Let's see. There's somebody mentioning at least you guys in Washington can vote for judges, not so much in Oregon. Yeah, that's true. I'm sorry that you can't down there. F-Track 8995. Look at the Moss landing data for the wind scenario. Okay, Moss landing wind scenario. It's spread all over because the particles from the batteries move different. Okay. Rochester, we're appealing, would love your help with Bakota. Yeah, I mean, all these things are terrible. These are really bad ideas. And there's really nothing good about the way they're located and the way they're forcing them in here when they really don't even make sense. That is definitely one of the challenges that I've seen here. I'm going to pop this open again so I can see the pop-out chat and make sure I don't miss any of your questions. I'll have to see the Moss Landing wind data. I'm very curious to see that. Obviously, both of these are kind of bracketing where I live, and it'd be interesting to see where they are. The aquifer impacts would affect many people, and when you dump toxic stew into the aquifer, that'll have an impact, especially in the Scatter Creek aquifer down there. Pat Caldwell 53-37. Do you have an opinion on Oregon? The conservatives are looking like they're making headway to changes in the ruling party. The one thing about Oregon that's interesting is that it has far fewer wealthy individuals than Washington State, and there's a variety of reasons for that. When people were escaping California, especially in the 70s, 80s, and in the 90s, they tended to skip Oregon and come to Washington more often than not. And part of the reason back then was that Oregon has an income tax and Washington did not. And so there were some benefits in them coming up to Washington. And there were other reasons, but that was a big part of it. So I need to spend a little more time down there. I have been involved occasionally helping activists in Oregon, and there's a lot of opportunities down there. It's a very grassroots-driven rural operation, especially with Portland's meltdown and the likelihood that more and more people really realizing what a clown show Portland becomes. Some of them may not want to turn their communities into that as well. Let's see. Somebody here thinks Joe Kent's running for president of the United States. I find that unlikely. F-Track 8995. I think the batteries are the way to pull the plug on the CCA. Pun very much intended. Yeah, I mean, they could be. The way most of them have been set up, it seems like you could clean them up pretty easily, but we'll see. Isn't it weird Washington has an income tax at the same time Missouri got rid of theirs in the same year? Yeah, I guess that's what keeps it up. You had 7 states, essentially, that did not have an income tax. Washington State was one of them. And Washington State imposing an income tax this cycle. And remember, you really had kind of a preview to the income tax, which is the capital gains tax. That's essentially leading up to this. So then, okay, so you get an income tax in Washington, and Washington State loses any reason for somebody to locate a very competitive or tight margin business here anymore. That goes away. And high-tech companies move somewhere else, too, for the same reason. It's just too easy to set your company up anywhere. You don't necessarily need the deep water port, the access to water, or whatever other benefits you might get in Washington that are unique and difficult to get in some parts of the country. So, and then we will see. So we'll see how it goes. Thunder Designer. Oh, by the way, going back to this real quick before I get to this question. There's also been a movement, of course, to eliminate property tax for a long time. You hear about it in Florida a little bit. There's 8 states that always talk about having some kind of movement out there. None of them have been serious. As I've looked at these over the years, and I would love to have somebody eliminate property tax and demonstrate how to do that, because that's definitely a road that you could go down. Eliminating dumb taxes is a good way to control the size of government, and it reduces the abuse level that government and bureaucrats who work there can impose on you through selective enforcement, through modification of the application of the tax to pick winners and losers, which bureaucrats and politicians like to do. And so most of those states aren't really doing that. I'd like to see somebody do it, because that'd be a tax that'd be great to get rid of. But South Dakota was the only one that I saw where they had a genuine movement through an initiative on the ballot to do that, and a practical approach. So I really think that's the step in the direction that when we can show that some of these taxes can be totally eliminated, and there's a movement to eliminate more of them, that would be really, really a big deal. Thunder's Designer 303. Glenn, I'm curious, did you see Trump saying that he would beat Elvis in a fight? The answer to that's no. And I'm not like a day-to-day Trump follower, or really for any politician for that matter. I just don't get caught up in that, all of the clickbait sort of stories that come out. But, I mean, you never know. I guess there's always something interesting that does happen out there. Denali 13H. Glenn, if DOL's Department of Licensing can register people to vote, why don't they indicate citizenship on a license or ID card? Seems like a simple solution to a current problem, but maybe that's a problem. I think the point of Department of Licensing registering non-U.S. citizens to vote is the feature, not the bug. I think you're looking at this like, oh no, they shouldn't be doing that. Well, they're doing it because the political class and the special interests behind them like that idea. They aren't doing it because they're too incompetent. They're doing it because they've basically been told to do that, or they will lose their job. And as Department of Licensing employees have told me, so they're doing it because they're forced to do it, and because the system's set up to make it very difficult to track. Is a feature, not a bug. That is the goal. That's the objective. Registering non-U.S. citizens to vote is the first step in getting them to vote, and that's what they're doing. So anyway. Okay. T.Z. Burton, Anton Statner addressed the 65% spike in high-end homes. That was a one-day sample from Redfin. Okay, yeah. So that, I don't know. That just seems like it seems pretty extreme, but let's watch over time. Let's see. Michael Case, 8231. The battery facility isn't a bad idea. They should have gone with sodium batteries if they were really concerned about the environment. I wonder if the lithium ion battery thing isn't more about kickbacks. Yeah, it's always about kickbacks. And I think this is kind of what people don't realize. And having done like data center work many years ago when I was setting up for battery backup and generator backup systems, and what do you have if the power goes down to keep your system up and running? A battery backup system in there is a key part of that program. The massive, large battery operations they're trying to put in for these is very different than what we used to look at with data centers or like hospitals or things like that when you're putting in an efficient fallback operation when the power grid goes down. And at the end of the day, you're basically going to need some type of consistency baseload power draw that the batteries just aren't going to help you with very much. They really use batteries so that you can take temporary power surges through windmill or solar power or whatever, which is weird because we don't really have a lot of either one of those in some of the areas where they're putting these batteries in. But that's a way to store it so you can keep the power flowing technically when it's not getting baseload power coming to it. Let's see. How can we see what the 43% increase in imports to China now with Ferguson? I think this is Jeremiah 29:11 YO. How can we see what the 43% increase is in imports to China now? Something Ferguson. I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. That. Sorry about that. I don't have any answer to whatever your question is. However, your next question, which says, LOL, why can't he never see my questions? Well, I could see that one. I don't know if I missed any others up there, but I don't see your name anywhere else. I really don't censor questions. And listen, you can see me. This is a live stream, so I'm not like cutting something out. Like I'm going in and deleting questions. I'm not deleting anything. They pull up, and I just have to be able to see the questions as they come up. It's possible I miss questions sometimes if you don't have the with the governor. That just my eye is always going to be drawn to that. It's a little bit easier to see, but I'm not really trying to skip anybody's question. I'll read your question even if I can't answer it. I'll at least read it so people know they asked it. There's a question for Sean, formerly artist John Cusack, I'm assuming. We the Governed was just, by the way, it didn't show up at We the Governed. That's why I didn't see it. Just wondering what tax should the government have? I think a consumption-style sales tax, maybe a VAT tax, is the only tax. I believe that's true. A consumption tax or an excise tax related to consumption in some way is the most efficient, least abusive sort of tax that government can impose. By its nature, it's going to be self-regulating because you can't make it too high because that just simply encourages the black market more. And it keeps government out of things like your business, like your property, and your income. That's it. Reducing it, and just because people will be screaming to the bank, the government, the bureaucrats, because a bunch of bloated bureaucrats will lose their jobs, is not an appealing, defense. I still think that's what I would try to go down. Here's a funny one. Eniat Mule 3820. I wonder where you're from. At We the Governed, and the only reason that didn't show up is because there was a period there. Sorry if this has been covered. Will Alberta succeed in their efforts to break away from Canada? I don't know, because you see the big government folk in Canada don't want Alberta to leave Canada. I mean, they definitely don't. Neither does Saskatchewan. I mean, they don't want Saskatchewan, because if Alberta goes, Saskatchewan's going to go. You're going to have kind of a domino effect there, where it's going to become very obvious to Canadian provinces that leaving the dead weight and anchor of Canada and some of their crazy policies that are even worse than ours in America, they may suddenly realize that that's a good idea, and everybody except for Quebec could leave. So that's a big deal. I don't know, but I think that is one of those things in the time span of history and actions that have an impact in North America. If Alberta leaves Canada, then that is one of those kind of key decision points, because they could be independent, but it also wouldn't surprise me if at some point in time they joined America. There's always been kind of especially in the western states of Canada, there's always been a pro-America element of their community to join America. It's gone up and in and out of favor over the last century and a half, but it has been around. I think I've mentioned before on the live streams when I was up in Victoria a little while ago, and I went to one of the museums there. Some of the leading lights in Victoria were champions of joining America back then, and it was before World War One, so that over 100 years ago. And so this has been something that has come up in Canada a number of times. Culturally, Alberta, Saskatchewan certainly have a lot more in common with America than they do with the rest of Canada. Arguably, probably parts of British Columbia as well, maybe the Northern Territories up there. If you eventually just create a whole land bridge to Canada or to Alaska with Canadian provinces that would join with America, that would be really interesting, and probably kind of serve to kind of the end of Canada as we know it today. Which would be fine. Listen, I worked in Canada for a year. I love Canada. I spent a lot of time up there over the years, mostly British Columbia, not so much in other parts of Canada. But and there's rurally there's still a lot of continuity in culture, especially along the coast and out and just up north into Canada. Vancouver itself Vancouver, BC, is very different, but again. Their drug experimental efforts there were horribly destructive to that community, but they were going on way back in the 90s when I was working up there. So anyway, let's see. Here's the next question. Sorry, Crunk Minds. Do you think if we had a minimum wage in place instead of an aggressive eat the rich tax legislation? We already have a very high minimum wage, one of the highest in the country. I don't know how that would change or affect any tax legislation, really. I appreciate you trying to get into some of that stuff, but I don't think that the minimum wages are kind of a waste. Anybody who's ever studied it, and especially if you've had kids that have tried to go out and get jobs recently, you realize that entry-level jobs, they'd be willing to work at a lower wage to learn how to work and learn how to do a job. And those wages and jobs being denied to them make it very difficult for younger people, teenagers, to work at least the way that I worked at that age. And I don't think that's better for society. If you do... if we finally do deport a high enough percentage of non-U.S. citizens here, then maybe they'll start to open up some of these jobs to younger people who do want to actually work some of them. I realize not all of them do, but plenty of them do. Let's see. TZ Burton's mentioning something about Ohio, but it's not really a question. People going back and forth. That's great. Let me jump down to a question here. Kinematic J. Pretty amazing. We haven't developed thorium salt batteries. Yeah. Like Stacks 18,650 batteries is green. Yeah, I know. I mean, it is kind of amazing. And frankly, some of the modern nuclear power plants really do seem to be substantially better than any of these other ideas, and frankly, more green and a lot cheaper too. TZ Burton, can you cover the $30 billion shortfall in voter-approved Phase 3 of Sound Transit? Sure, that's a good question. So Sound Transit, which is the light rail operation in mostly King County, it impacts Pierce and Snohomish, and eventually it'll impact more, but really it impacts everybody because it's essentially a black hole and a pit of incompetence and really bad behavior that we've seen going on there, where it's the equivalent of Washington State's California's bridge or train to nowhere. The Sound Transit is a train. It's empty most of the time. It's a train for the 1% that ride it. No, not too many people. It's a great way for meth addicts and fentanyl users to get a view while they're getting high. And it's a good way for criminals to get around the city, but it's not been highly effective. It's certainly not a profitable public transportation system. We're taking 200-year-old technology, and we're trying to pretend like there's some level of advancement for spending billions of dollars to build just small distances for marginal gains on a train system. I mean, it's just not really great. So the $30 billion underwater because they're incompetent, they're corrupt, they're dishonest. There's massive kickback schemes associated with Sound Transit. There's no accountability, and nobody's holding them accountable at all. And so this massive, that's so big that put it in context, that is a massive budget shortfall. And this is, they've been running a Ponzi scheme with phase 1, 2, and 3, where each phase they go into debt. And they promise new promises with the next phase. They get out there and they find a way to squeeze it in and get and start extracting that cash. And then they're really just paying off the debt from the previous one, and they're not going to get to the promises of the second one. And that's essentially how the Ponzi scheme keeps working. And they've been able to do this for several decades. Eventually, all Ponzi schemes do come to an end, even in Washington State, and even for Sound Transit, and that's where it's headed. So, especially when the money really hits the wall, I suspect that that they're going to have some serious problems with it. It is a horrible, wasteful, pointless bureaucratic operation that has, I drive by their construction all the time. And listen, I like public works generically, like, hey, there's a good reason to put something in, but you don't have to bloat it to the point where you're spending 100 times what it should cost, way over budget, everything being wrong, transit-oriented development, trying to be everything to all people. Instead of just focusing on whatever you want to get done. And there's no way that a rapidly deployed bus system wouldn't have been more efficient, more effective, and saved us $50-60 billion and still let people get around on some kind of public transportation system. And it would have been flexible. You could have moved it around. You could have decided, hey, not enough people live here anymore. We could shift the business here. And the Sound Transit's stuck, fixed in the ground wherever it goes, whether it's going to be, it already expired before they built the station. Let's see. Alberta has all the money, but Calgary and Edmonton equals Seattle. TZ Burton, yes, they do. That's true. I don't disagree. I mean, actually, Alberta and Saskatchewan, they really have all the mineral resources. So does the Northwest Territories, and the oil and everything else. So America would really benefit from having them join us in a lot of ways. And I think the people who live there would benefit as well. Thunder Designer 303. Have you seen the news of Chicago building the World Technology Center that looks reminiscent to the two towers in New York, planning to complete by 2050? Is this a good idea or bad idea? Chicago's on the downward slope, so I don't know why anybody would be investing money in Chicago right now. Chicago's just simply doing the same thing that Baltimore and Detroit have done in the past: chase everybody out who's serious and ramp up as much tax extraction as you can get, elect super corrupt politicians there, and then wonder why everything's going wrong and your crime has jacked up. Crunkmeyers, I butchered my last question. Sorry. If we had the negative income tax, if we had the negative income tax instead of the progressive 9.9% tax, do you think it would fare better for middle class like me? No, I mean, I think any income tax is a bad idea. Why add the government? I mean, okay, so part of this is you're funding a massive, bloated, intrusive bureaucracy like the IRS. So imagine having two massive, intrusive, abusive, and corruptible bureaucracies like the IRS. And you have one at the federal level, one at the state level. Nothing good comes out of that. And they're going to pick winners and losers. They're going to manipulate it to abuse certain categories of people. They're going to selectively enforce it. So insiders get a pass, and outsiders like you and I, we're the ones that get abused. I mean, this is how they'll do it. So there's nothing good about an income tax. I would reject it at every possible turn. Let's see. TZ Burton, OMAC, Washington, apple orchards need teenagers to pick apples. Yes, they do. Although a lot of automation, I think, is coming to some of these field jobs out there. But I mean, listen, I bucked hay, I shoveled manure, and I mowed lawns. I laid sod. I built cabinets. I delivered newspapers. I washed dishes. I don't know why that's so difficult for people to realize that teenagers are perfectly capable of doing those jobs today. And the responsibility and the practical experience they have when they do jobs like that translates into a more realistic view of the world as they get older. It's not about how much money they're making, and it's not about living at that level forever. This is the shocking level of incompetence and ignorance and stupidity that exists with the socialists, because the presumption is if you work for McDonald's flipping burgers, then you need to be able to make enough money to support a family on that job, when the reality is that isn't the type of job you're going to be supporting the family on. Nobody will be. That's the type of job you start out on to learn how to eventually build up to get a job that you're going to support a family on. And so this presumption that leftists have that you're stuck in stasis forever at whatever level that you're in now is just as unrealistic as people thinking that just because our state's Republican will be Republican forever. Nothing is in stasis. It is always in change. It's always being challenged. It's always being pushed, and it's always changing. So that is important to remember. And boy, did I ever get off topic on that one. Sorry, guys, I'm getting a little late here. I'm going to run down these last few questions, and then we're going to get going. Let's see. Graphics Guru, 2879. Yeah, oh, this is funny, though. T.T. Burton, I got to read your comment first. I see Sound Transit cross I-90 every morning, and I have more people in my car than the train, and I drive solo. I know. You're not alone, man. I see the same thing. Let's see. Above that, Denali 13H. Glenn, any thoughts on why Republicans didn't push more to repeal the tax on gold and silver? A lot of talk about it up front, and then crickets. Actually, as far as I knew, it went quite a ways. It didn't get through, but remember, and I know this is probably a surprise, but the Democrats are the ones who controlled the state house and legislature, and they were able to get Democrats to sponsor that bill. Surprisingly, I think it was Manka Dhingra in the Senate, mainly because she has an Indian background from the country of India, and I think it dawned on her when she went down to visit some of these shops that the people buying gold and silver were just like in her home country of India. They tend to be more minorities, people from other countries. It was a common thing. And I think when she realized that, unfortunately, DEI seems to translate into how they think in this world, but it motivated her, I think, to be willing to sponsor it, recognizing that it was a dumb tax that was passed without thought or reason. And the Republicans all voted and would support it at every step of the way. But if you have a Democrat taking point on it, it's more likely for it to get through. Understand that's how it works when the Democrats control both sides of the legislature. Graphics Guru 2879. Do you think Russia and China could take on the U.S. if no nuclear weapons were involved? No, not in the way that you think. I don't know why we would want to take on those countries. There's no practical reason for that. But remember, and this is something that America has demonstrated, at least going back to the Civil War for a long time, is that when we're fighting these wars, we're not fighting them at home. We're fighting them overseas somewhere. And America is one of the only countries with the ability to project power like that, with the exception of nuclear weapons and possible changes in future warfare techniques. But for the most part, we're the only country that has the ability to project power that way. And I don't know why we would want to, outside of just protecting allies and defensive sort of conflicts. You know, the thing about Iran is that you have a crazy government there, an absolute crazy government run by crazed lunatics who always were trying to kill Americans at every turn of every opportunity since the time I was 9 years old. And I remember seeing the hostages on television. And eventually, you're just going to go too far. You're eventually going to threaten people enough that there'll be consequences for it eventually. You know, Iran could have been a normal country and could have been very profitable and very wealthy. And instead, they spent their time going to some kind of apocalyptic religious craze where they had to abuse the people who live there, support terrorism overseas, and then, they are where they are right now. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you. Let's see. Pat Caldwell, 5337. Can you work on a list of judges that will be up for election? I'd like to do that. Definitely Supreme Court, although I would recommend there's a group called Full Court Press that's been doing a great job on this issue, and they're going to have a list out of the 5 sane Supreme Court justices versus the crazies and why we need to elect sane people in that position. However, I just missed a question. I'll go back to this. Sean, formerly artist John Kuzak, will they ever replace the I-5 Portland-Vancouver bridge, and why does the price keep rising? Well, the price keeps rising, and by the way, yes, they're going to eventually have to replace it. The price keeps rising because you have a lot of corrupt people in government, and they have no interest in actually replacing the bridge. They want to hold hostage the need to replace a bridge and get TriMet across the river from Portland because it bankrupted them as well, and it's essentially a failed transportation program, and they can dump some of the bond costs and the overhead costs of this operation if they can get those light rail tracks over the Columbia River into Washington State, and then dump on the taxpayers of Washington some of the costs that Oregon doesn't have the ability to pay for. And so that's really what it's all about. It's all about the light rail. The bridge is just the excuse, especially with the designs that they have now. They're not even talking about adding lanes to the bridge, which is insane. They should be. Listen, if you're going to go through the hassle of building this bridge, you should be doubling the lanes on it, even if you're not totally ready on the other side, just so that this expensive part of the bridge design's done. And then you start working on the Oregon side if they don't want to have traffic jams over there, or vice versa on Washington. You build a big bridge. It's just ridiculous they won't do this. And it keeps going up because there's just that many corrupt people out there. Now, some of the costs going up is going to be raw goods increases, but a lot of it's just wasted soft costs going in people's pockets of some kind. Let's see. Sharon Milligan, 7560. Hi, Glenn. When do we start signing to stop the income tax? You do that once the initiative's been approved and the final ballot titles challenge is over. I would anticipate in a few months. So that'll probably happen before soon. T.Z. Burton, we were able to fund roads before 1913. Isn't that a miracle? We certainly were. And even after that, we were able to fund roads. If you look back in the 1960s, when a lot of the major construction projects like 405 and the original Hood Canal Bridge and I-90 and all these other things were going on in Washington State, somehow they were able to build those bridges and roads and freeways and expansions at the time for 5% soft costs. Nowadays, it's like 60% soft costs that are going to absolutely nothing that has anything to do with gravel or pavement or engineering or design. It's just garbage costs, mitigation schemes, all kinds of stuff they throw into it. That's one of the reasons why they don't build bridges that easily. Deanne Barnes, 5530. Hello, Glenn. Can you please talk about the Climate Commitment Act? How is it one reason for the gas prices, and where does that money go? It is a wholesale, so the Climate Commitment Act imposes, based on the carbon credit auctions, which are costs that are incurred by the wholesalers, that they buy these carbon credits, and then that money is what they have to spend, is what they bulk up the price of the wholesale price of the fuel going to the gas station. So that adds the 40 cents or it's 45 cents, something like that per gallon. And then you're paying that as like a hidden gas tax. That money goes into a fund called the Climate Commitment Act cash. It actually goes into this slush fund that's managed by the Department of Commerce. It's kind of a off-the-books secret stash of cash that they get to run with, and that's how it works. And this is why they love it in Olympia, because $1.5 billion has been collected, and I'm sure it'll all be squandered. Okay, let's see. I need to just close this up, guys, because we are a lot later than I thought we'd be. And there were a lot of good questions over here. Guys, thank you for keep asking that. For those of you asking about the Columbia Bridge, I am anticipating getting an interview with Representative John Lee, who is really an subject matter expert on that issue. And since I'm recording this in Vancouver, he lives nearby, so I'm going to try to get him in, hopefully this Friday, which means I'll probably have a series of videos of that interview. And I'm kind of dialing in the studio here a little bit. You can't really see here, but if you look over here, you kind of can see that there's different microphones. And I think I can do a better job than I did with the Jim Walsh interview. That's what I'm hoping to do. We'll see how that goes. And I've got more video work that I need to do tonight, and hopefully I can get that finished as well. Let me know what you think about this and what other questions I missed down below, and I'll try to answer that in the comments section. And if I see you at any of these events coming up, there will not be a live stream next week. I was not able to organize one next week, mostly my own schedule throwing me off. But I do look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. It should be the same night, Tuesday that week, and we'll see where it goes from there. So thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, the future does belong to those who show up, if you show up regularly and consistently over a longer period of time. So with that, we will see you in a couple weeks. Thank you so much.